Alright, in this video I'm going to show how I'm going to go about repairing this carbon fiber hood. This thing actually looks amazing. It's great quality hood, but damage during shipping has created that situation there. And now where I was going to leave this all carbon fiber, I'm going to end up painting it because I have to repair that. I'm not going to leave that defect there. Now you might be tempted to just sort of smooth that out and paint over it, but the trouble is this coating has potentially delaminated underneath there, so later on those cracks could resurface if not repaired thoroughly. So what I plan to do is to use a angle grinder with a roll lock to kind of get down in there pretty far to really get almost through that whole outer coating over the carbon fiber. And then I'm going to use some reinforced filler. There's lots of options for this. I mean, you can use fiberglass reinforced filler, etc. This is actually carbon fiber enriched filler, which seemed fitting since it's a carbon fiber hood. But anyways, the gist of it is you just I would recommend using some form of a reinforced filler to give it a little bit more structure, especially since there can be some expansion, flexibility, etc., and you want to allow that to all work together and not potentially crack, delaminate, whatever later on. So let's get started. Alright, so here's where we're at. I used a pretty aggressive roll lock, it was 24 grit actually, so I'm going to be careful not to go too quick with that. But what I could actually notice as I was getting down through the clear layer, once I got to the carbon fiber surface, I could actually see that carbon coming through there. So you don't want to go into the carbon layer because that wasn't actually cracked, it was just the surface out there. So in any case, really what you want is you want to be down to an area where none of those cracks that were there remain anymore, because you don't want those to propagate back into the repair area or extend and expand elsewhere. So here's where we're at. Now I'll be able to apply that filler. This stuff looks pretty good, but like I said, there are other options, and they say mix this with a golf ball size of this with a 1-inch strip of the hardener. Now, I actually won't need that much. It's such a small repair, but it's important to be mixed in the appropriate ratios. So, and I should note I'm not actually a professional in terms of body work. But that said, I've had quite a bit of experience, played around in the garage quite a bit, and mostly really trying to show that these projects can be done without extensive training, etc. But in any case, let's get moving forward. So one thing I wanted to show is actually once I started performing some cleaning, you actually put your solvent on there. Actually, what highlighted, I had a few remaining cracks, so I had to expand that area that I prepared. But you can see how that actually helps you to identify any underlying remaining damage. So cleaning is helpful, absolutely necessary to make sure you have good adhesion, but also an important step in terms of ensuring that your repair is what you need it to be. All right, so now that I'm pretty sure that the primary area of repair is where I need it to be, I'm going to prep the surface beyond just the immediate repair. That way, with filler beyond there, that can stay attached, because remember, we need a good mechanical adhesion, so you have to have this area prepared as well. So I just have a DA with a little bit of 100 grit, which is pretty aggressive, so you gotta be careful with that, but I'm just gonna prepare just a little bit beyond that area. All right, so there the filler is dried and ready for sanding. And I'll just kind of take the top layer off with the DA, but I'm not going to actually do too much work with that. I'm going to pretty quickly move to flexible sanding board. That way I can make sure that I don't accidentally take off too much or get into neighboring parts of the panel. All right, so at this point my filler is just above the surface of the hood. So I'm going to start using my sanding board. And notice when using the DA, keeping it constantly moving, trying to keep it as flat as possible, resisting the urge to bring it up on end, because you want to use the surface area of the disc to keep from any putting any irregularities into the surface or grooves or that kind of thing if you were to bring it up on end like that. So try to keep it flat, keep it moving, and constantly monitor your progress. I also recommend kind of keeping your work area clean, so vacuum the dust off. Now I'll move on to using the flexible sanding board here. This thing's really just styrofoam. And that was 100 grit, so it worked pretty quickly. This is 220, so it'll take a little longer with that, but it'll help me approach what I want a little bit more gradually. Now I'll move that X pattern like this, and that helps to sort of average out the motions that you have to keep from sanding too much in one spot. All right. All right, so now we're getting pretty close to where we need to be. And to me, the marker for knowing that is seeing that these edges are kind of milky as they blend into the rest. Meaning instead of being a sharp line, it kind of fades into the color of the filler fades into the color of the panel. And using a gloved hand, because you don't want to put the oils of your hand into the project, you can feel that, and you shouldn't be able to feel any transitions. Now, I'll prime this too, so I'll kind of spot prime this area. That'll allow me to fill in any minor imperfections. You can actually see a few little kind of little pits there, which isn't uncommon. You can use a glazing putty for that, but honestly, a high build primer actually does a pretty good job filling in some of those surface irregularities. So I think we're getting pretty close. All right, so I've spent quite a bit of time cleaning. I just used some lacquer thinner, but panel prep works great. Um, Anything like that at all, just organic solvent to kind of get that all cleaned off, and um, those things evaporate pretty quickly to get the surface nice and dry. So I'm really just going to prime this area here, and that'll actually serve a couple purposes. One, it'll actually help again get rid of some of those minor surface irregularities. But the other thing too is that actually I'd kind of act as kind of a guide coat, um, meaning as I go and sand that later with my sanding board, I'll be able to see some high spots and low spots to see how good the job is. I chose this one. It's pretty nice primer in a can. I mean, you can go ahead and just use your gun too, but honestly, this does a pretty good job, especially for just priming a small area like that. All right, so after a 10-minute flash time, I'll give it a second coating here. Then one little tip I've shared before, if you don't want to continuously clog up and replace your nozzles, get a little gun cleaner like this. That cleans it out real well, and you can reuse that nozzle without worrying about being all gummed up. All right, so now the primer is dried, and I can see that some of those surface imperfections may be a little much for just primer. I may end up having to use another layer of the filler and or possibly the glazing putty. But we'll see. I got my sanding board here with some 220 on it, and as I kind of go in my X pattern to bring that down, I'll see if those go away. If they're still present, we'll consider whether we need another layer of primer or possibly some more filler. All right, so earlier I said one of the nice benefits of a layer of primer is it can actually act somewhat as a guide coat, because as you sand, you start to see some of the high and low spots, and I'll show you that kind of in action. So anything that is being contacted by the sandpaper ends up getting dull like this, and then in these low spots here, you can see they haven't been contacted, so they're still kind of that little bit more shiny primer. So just something to kind of pay attention to as you work along. You can actually have a little bit better contrast in your high and low spots with primer. All right, so next part to discuss is what kind of sandpaper, what grit do you want to use for preparation of this panel? So that depends a little bit on what your next layer is going to be. And again, I'm not a professional, so actually, there may be a better way to do this, but this is how I do it in my advice, which has worked out pretty well for me. So if we were going to do primer on top of this panel, you could actually be a little bit more aggressive with grit. You could be like 220 or something like that, because you're gonna smooth that out again, and the primer is gonna add a little bit of build to fill in any kind of surface irregularities from that aggressive or relatively aggressive grit. Okay. Now in this case though, you could, because this is other than here where we had filler and such, you could just base coat over this and then clear coat on top of that. If you're going to do base coat on top of this, then you do not want anything, I would say, more aggressive than 400 grit. You might even consider something like a 600. So what happens if you screw that up and you go too aggressive with the grit? So your grit is too low. Let's say we prep this with 220 and then we were to just base coat over that. Well, base coat can conform to the surface pretty well, and you may end up seeing those scratches from the sandpaper in your finished product. So you want to be a little bit careful, because that could potentially, not look so great. Sometimes it's super subtle and it won't make much difference, but we're trying to do as good of a job as we can. So it's good to have a smart selection for your sandpaper. So again, kind of 400 grit would be my recommendation for this. It's rough enough that you're going to get the surface prep that you need for a good adhesion, but it's not so rough that you're going to see those scratches in the final product. So as you're preparing the surface on your hood, once you start thinking you're getting pretty close, I recommend using some wax and grease remover, getting everything cleaned off, because your spots that still need more preparation will become a little bit more obvious once you start cleaning. So you can see actually right there, just a little bit of shininess here. I can see some right there. So as you kind of move around, use lighting in your shop to help kind of highlight those areas, because you want to take extra special time, especially in these kind of irregular areas like this, because any of those areas that are shiny at the end and not adequately prepared could run you into trouble later with paint delaminating or peeling or whatever. All right, so here are the damaged areas repaired just the way I want it, and the surface has been primered. Now I did extend the primer beyond the area of the repair. Reason why is because I was using a sanding board to smooth that area out, and I want to make sure that all of the area that may have had those deeper level scratches from the more aggressive sandpaper that I had on the sanding board are primed over, because I don't want those to show through the finished product. So I extended to the whole area that would have been affected by that. And it's nice and smooth. And use a gloved hand and feel that surface, because your hand will perceive minor imperfections really pretty well. And then also using good lighting, like flashlight or other things that are really well lit shop, and then changing your position, kind of coming down on the side like this, and even after you spray it with some cleaner like wax and grease remover, that wet surface will often show up any imperfections a little bit better. And then the other thing too is looking to see that these edges are kind of milky and kind of fading from one color to the other with no really significant transitions between one color and the next. Okay, so use a number of different senses and features to help you to know that you're at the right position to move on to the next step. Okay, and for this hood, have kind of a unique idea for painting. Originally I was just going to leave it all carbon fiber, but what I'll end up doing, see if I end up liking it, but worth a shot, is to actually leave this part here exposed carbon fiber. So I'll clear over that and I'll base coat everything else with the truck's base coat color, which is a kind of a platinum silvery gray color. Okay, so we'll kind of see how that works out. There'll be a separate video on that. But anyways, the repair portion of this is all done, ready to be base coat clear coated.